Next, detectives are still haunted by what they saw.
To see this amount of destruction that had taken place inside this residence, that kind of has stuck with me throughout all these years.
Just a completely horrifying case. Hearing about that, it just makes your gut hurt.
The case crisscrosses the country.
We were doing the math, and I thought, you know, how far is it from Ohio to Bakersfield and back? Oh, 5,400 miles.
After that many miles, a lot can happen to a car.
The FBI, they just said, can you look at this radiator and tell us where the car has been based on the insects?
And what scientists find puts a masked murderer behind bars.
Yes, it was certainly good and evil, bad against good, good winning out.
Their faith was a central part of life for the Harper family of Bakersfield, California. Each Sunday, the family would attend church services 2 times, once in the morning and again later in the evening. But the service on the July 4th weekend of 2003 promised to be special.
On Sunday, July 6th, the entire family attended church services in the morning. Joni Harper presented her youngest child, the 6-week-old infant Marshall, to the congregation for the very first time.
So it was a joyous occasion to them because Marshall was brought out to church, and this is his first experience.
But none of the Harpers showed up for the evening service.
No one thought anything of it. They thought maybe the family just needed some rest.
After 2 days passed with no word, a friend who was very close to the family went to the house to check on them. A short time later, she made a frantic call to 911.
Police department, can I help you?
My sister, my best friend, she's dead. She's laying on the bed.
Okay.
Oh, God, help me, please help me.
Ma'am, we'll get somebody out there.
Police arrived to find the Harper family dead in the residence.
It's very rare that you have a mass murder involving family members, let alone 3 of them being children, babies, in essence.
When you go to these crime scenes, you do relate to your own personal life as, man, I have kids that are this age. And so that is something that kind of weighs heavily on you.
The deceased were the family matriarch, Ernestine, 70 years old. Her daughter, Joni, 39 years old, was the mother of the 3 child victims, the youngest of which, Marshall, was only 6 weeks old.
Who kills a baby? I mean, let alone the other 2 kids, but baby can't talk. Baby's never gonna be an eyewitness. The only threat the baby could potentially have is maybe crying for hours.
You can't even think about it. It's too painful, really, to even imagine.
Spent .22 caliber shell casings were scattered across the scene. A knife, apparently missing from the kitchen, was thought to be the other murder weapon.
You could see the spot in the knife block where the knife was. We looked for it in dishes, the dirty dishes, and the cabinets. It was never found.
At first, it seemed the children's mother, Joni Harper, could have been the primary target.
We know for a fact she was shot 5 times. As we turned her a little bit, on her back, she had 5 stab wounds. So anybody that gets stabbed after they've been murdered, you gotta look at it. Somebody may have had a personal issue, vendetta, grudge.
The apparent entry point into the Harper house, which was loaded with security features, was a sliding glass door, and there was no evidence it had been forced open. But what kind of robber goes into a house full of people?
If the intruder was there to rob the house, why would they wait until 5 people are inside the house and then they don't take anything at all? So it was pretty clear early on that it was not a burglary.
This was potentially what we would call a staged crime scene, where the criminal knows, hey, if I don't do something to cover my tracks and make this look like a burglary or a robbery or what have you, then the focus is immediately going to be on me.
The only member of the family to escape harm was Vincent Brothers, Joni's husband and the children's father. He was out of town.
The first person we would have been trying to contact would have been Vincent Brothers. We'd be contacting him for a number of reasons. One, have you heard about your family? What do you know? Who are potential threats? Who are potential enemies? Are you okay?
Vincent Brothers was located in North Carolina, visiting family over the 4th of July break on a long-planned trip. And upon hearing what happened to his family, he was all but speechless.
We just need to talk a little bit, okay? Is that okay with you? Vincent? Huh? We need your help. That's the bottom line. Okay?
I just want to say thank you, Father in heaven, for picking Ernestine Harper to be our mother.
Any murder shocks a community, but the murder of an entire family, including 3 young children, made for a blow still felt in Bakersfield, California.
What I remember most is 4 white caskets, 2 with the adults, 2 with the older children, because baby Marshall was buried in his mother's casket and she was cradling him. And the thing that I will never forget is the photos, especially of these little children on top of the caskets. You just can't get those images out of your brain.
Ernestine Harper was a well-known community activist. Her daughter, Joni, was a local school supervisor who moonlighted as a referee for Division I women's college basketball. This mother-daughter pair lived together and raised Joni's children together.
My mother and my sister Joni were very close. Yeah, very close. My mother loved us all equally and as much. But of course, because Joni lived with her for so long, for so many years, that just made them inseparable, really.
Joni's husband, Vincent Brothers, was also a local educator.
Joni worked at one of the elementary schools. Vincent also was an assistant principal at the same school. The kids really took to them and really enjoyed spending time with them.
Vincent Brothers was well thought of, almost pillar of the community, very well respected. Parents liked him, other educators liked him.
Vincent Brothers was on a long-planned trip to visit relatives on the other side of the country. Records showed that Vincent flew from Bakersfield to Columbus, Ohio, 4 days before the murders, and then he and his brother rented a car to visit their mother in North Carolina. That's where police told him what happened to his wife and children.
Interview with Vincent Brothers was extremely difficult. I mean, I've been through this process before with other victims or families. We try to be as disarming as possible.
It's a traumatic time, but we need help to understand what's going on. And the only way we can understand what's going on is to talk to you and try to, it's part of the investigation. You understand that, don't you? Yes? Okay. So, I'm sorry, you want to say something? Hey, what, you need like a trash can or something over here? Take a deep breath. You gonna get sick? There you go. We just need to talk a little bit, okay? Is that okay with you?
As for Vincent being a suspect, credit card purchases are tracked, and there were records showing him in Ohio and in North Carolina.
We had detectives go to Columbus. We found his credit card under the name of Vincent Brothers had been used at 2 stores. And he tracked down both credit cards, and sure enough, it signed Vincent Brothers on the receipt.
So if the Harpers were targeted for murder, and Vincent Brothers wasn't the killer, who would do this?
Was this a crime of opportunity? In my mind, I'd ruled that out, but we still had to have somebody look at it with some depth. We looked at any similar crimes in the neighborhood, any similar crimes in the Southern California region where you're having that many people wiped out. It's not a random killing. This is not a spree killing or a thrill kill. This is a mass murder of 5 people in one instance.
In the search for suspects, detectives found a surprise possibility. It turned out the Harper matriarch, Ernestine, was very high profile on some divisive community issues and might have made some potentially violent enemies.
Ernestine Harper worked with some unsavory characters at times, and they thought that that could be what was happening. Bakersfield police, they increased patrols just in that area because they did not know what they were dealing with, and people were scared.
Most people who knew Ernestine Harper agreed this woman was a force to be reckoned with.
My mother was involved with fighting for those who were treated unjustly in the criminal system, in the judicial system.
In fact, she was very active in the 1996 exoneration of a young black man named Alfred Rollins, who was wrongly convicted of murder.
The girl that he was supposed to have murdered was Hispanic, and so my mother helping him getting off, not being tried again, they speculated, could this have been someone who did not like her as a result of Alfred Rollins being released?
But something didn't add up. If the killer was a stranger with a grudge, how did he get into a house loaded with home security?
Ernestine Harper fortified her house, not only from the exterior, but from the interior as well, with door braces, locks on the windows, thumb locks, and she always would have that sliding glass door locked with a wooden dowel in the trap.
Detectives now took another look at Vincent Brothers, a man some called a pillar of the community. It turned out there were problems in his marriage to Joni Harper.
Vincent Brothers, he had been married at least 4 times, twice to Joni Harper. His history with any relationship with women was never something that was a fairy tale. There was nothing good that came out of these things.
In 1988, he was convicted of spousal abuse, and he spent 6 days in jail.
If Vincent's marriage was ending, that created a possible motive.
If he was married to Joni, he's financially responsible for her, potentially for alimony too. You know he's gonna get hit 3 times for child support, all 3 children.
But Vincent had an alibi. He was seen by many people in Ohio during the period of the murders. And he said his credit cards would also back him up. Detectives went to the sources of the credit card receipts, which were in Ohio.
They saw that Vincent Brothers had been at a Chinese food restaurant. Vincent Brothers had been at Walmart in Ohio. But when they dug a little deeper, they saw that Melvin Brothers was the one on security camera at Walmart, not Vincent.
Melvin, Vincent's brother, lived in Ohio and was now confronted by police.
Videos don't lie, clearly showed Melvin. Melvin eventually admitted to it, even though he did not at first.
This proved Vincent was lying, but it didn't prove murder. Detectives wondered, was it possible Vincent could have driven from Ohio back to California, killed his family, and then got himself back to Ohio so it looked like he never left? If so, the key would appear to be his rental car.
We knew we had to get that rental, and we had the FBI seize it for us. We also were fortunate that there were only 3 other renters other than Vincent, and we were able to contact all of them.
These other renters told detectives of their respective destinations, all of which were on the eastern side of the country. But for a car rented only 4 times, this one had clocked an awful lot of miles.
There's 5,400 some odd miles unaccounted for. So we were doing the math, and I thought, you know, how far is it from Ohio to Bakersfield and back? Well, 5,400 miles.
It doesn't take 5,000 miles to get from Ohio to North Carolina.
Vincent now said he took the car to Chicago to see a baseball game with another of his brothers.
And that's why there's a lot of miles on it. That wouldn't even be half the amount of miles we found on that rental, which was 5,400 miles.
Investigators worried that mileage numbers on a rental car odometer wasn't nearly enough to win a murder case. And even the car rental company admitted their record keeping on mileage probably wouldn't withstand the scrutiny of a murder trial. Still, detectives were convinced the rental car held the answer, and they came up with an unprecedented way to find it.
The most incredible thing about this case, in terms of forensics, and this is why I really remember this case, is because they thought out of the box.
Although Vincent Brothers had been caught in some lies concerning his whereabouts on the day his family was murdered, he was adamant about two things. He wasn't the killer, and he couldn't be because he was thousands of miles away when the murders happened. Investigators were unconvinced and turned to Vincent's rental car.
So then we thought, okay, how do we prove this? How do we prove this car was over there? Clearly, we had the mileage locked down. We know he rented it, rental receipts, but we needed more.
The idea was brought up to look for bug parts on the car. And at the time I was thinking, wow, that's kind of a unique thing. It wasn't my idea, I can't take credit for it. But it was something that it was brought up, and I think a lot of us were just thinking, that would be cool if that would work.
Investigators reached out to Lynn Kimsey, a PhD at the Bohart Museum of Entomology, home to one of the largest insect collections in North America. She was asked to do something no entomologist had apparently ever been asked to do.
We got a phone call from the FBI saying, would you be willing to look at a radiator to see what insects are on it? And we're going, okay, anything for a weird life.
Kimsey and her team were given no information about the case. All investigators wanted to know was what kind of bugs were in the radiator and where did they come from.
We said yes. Then they drove up with the radiator and the air filter assembly, and we picked over both. We put them on a sheet of white paper to keep everything clean and picked them off.
A car driven thousands of miles picks up a lot of bugs. Using a dissecting microscope with up to 50 times magnification, Kimsey's team examined these bits of bugs.
There were fragments of perhaps 30 or 40. Most of them were uninformative. They were the kinds of things like houseflies that you would get anywhere. There were about 6 that were actually pretty informative in terms of putting it into a very specific place. We had a grasshopper leg and the sort of upper half of a wasp and fragments of a couple of what are called true bugs. These are insects that have sucking mouth parts.
Because of varied terrain and varied climate, bugs develop characteristics that allow them to adapt to the region in which they live. The team was easily able to identify where some of these bug fragments originated.
We found insects that could only have been from the southwestern U.S. We couldn't pin them down to a specific state, but sort of the Four Corners area and then down into southeastern California.
This was bad news for Vincent Brothers, who said from the beginning that he never drove west of Chicago. But the case was far from over. Investigators had to show that Vincent Brothers, or anyone, could drive 5,400 miles in less than 48 hours, back and forth from Ohio to California, and also commit a mass murder during that same time period.
What it came down to is that if it were to happen, he would have to drive an average of about 70 miles per hour without stopping, without sleeping.
Investigators concluded that was exactly what Vincent Brothers did. They believe he planned the murders for months and waited for the July 4th weekend in the belief that any gunshots would be mistaken for fireworks. After flying from Bakersfield to Ohio and making sure he was seen, he drove the rental car back to California. Once inside the house, he opened fire, killing everyone, including his infant son. But now he was on the clock. He had to get back to Ohio, and quickly, to establish his alibi. He blitzed across the country, averaging 70 miles an hour. He would have had to drive without sleeping for more than 30 hours to make it appear he'd never left Ohio. Detectives believe he had a large stash of cash, which allowed him to pay for gas without leaving a credit card trail. He most likely wore a disguise to avoid being identified later by surveillance cameras. But it turns out Vincent Brothers, like most everyone else, didn't think much about bugs. And those bugs left no doubt that his rental car was driven for many miles west of Chicago.
As far as I know, nothing like this has ever been done, mostly because The circumstances were so perfect with this one.
Vincent's brother Melvin, seen in this photograph, cooperated with the investigation and was never charged in this case. In 2007, Vincent Brothers was found guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder. He now sits on death row at San Quentin Prison, all courtesy of investigators with the imagination to realize that bug fragments in a car grill could solve a murder.
The science in this case blows my mind to this day. Who would have ever thought that you could talk to an entomologist and pinpoint where bugs, tiny little insects, are found in the United States, and that they would even still be on the car? It's unbelievable. I still can't believe it.